I like being introduced as an expert. Might give me some imposter syndrome, but and when I heard that I'd be speaking to mostly vet students, how many of you are vet students? Okay, basically, any farmer students here? Okay, all right, got one. Yeah. So when I heard I'd be speaking to vet students, I was tempted to start off with a relevant James Herriot story, but I'll have to save my Yorkshire accent for another day. Um, so yeah, as we said, we're going to be talking about cow-calf contact, and this is a condensed version of a presentation I gave at Ridgetown last year. And some of the feedback that I got from the students there last year is that they thought it was interesting, but they wished that I had a little bit more data. And I'm sorry to disappoint you, but I don't have more data. So I'm going to wow you with my anecdotes. And yeah, I hope you enjoy it nonetheless. So a little bit about our farm. We're a small farm in Northumberland County, sort of between Toronto and Ottawa, smack in the middle. We have about 50 kilograms of quota, so we're quite small. And we have a compost pack barn. And we do quite a bit of cross breeding. We have sort of different breeds as well. And we are on the grass-fed program, so we get a 10-cent premium on our milk. So cow-calf contact, I'm going to talk about how we do it on our farm, which is not the only way to do it, but how we do it, and some benefits that we see from it. I'll cover some challenges that there are with it as well. And yeah, so I won't dwell on this too much. There's cow-calf contact. It kind of encompasses a few different styles of keeping calves and cows together, from full-time to part-time to like foster cows, which is, sort of putting up different calves on not their mother, but a separate cow. But for this presentation, I'm just going to be talking about 24 hours, free cow-calf. This is full-time, 24/7 with their mom. So this is kind of a timeline of the calf's pre-weaning life on our farm. So when the calf is born, we'll go into each of these in detail, but when the calf is born, for about 3 days, we put them in a pen with their mom to bond, and then we kick them out with the cows, just the regular milking herd, and that's the suckling period, which is, for almost 2 months. And then we wean them, and we do a 2-stage weaning process with nose flaps. So the weaning, which is just them not drinking milk, but they're still with their mom, that takes about a week or two. And then we separate them after that. So the first one, the bonding phase, when a calf is born on our farm, it looks pretty similar to most other farms. Like, we make sure they're getting adequate colostrum in adequate amounts. We are dipping their navel. We're doing all the calf care stuff that every other dairy farmer does. And if anything, we're maybe a little bit lazy about it. But and once we've done all that, we move the calf and her cow into a separate pen. Ideally, it's just them in the pen. The practicalities of a farm, sometimes we're keeping multiple animals in there at a time. But ideally, they're in a separate pen, and this is so that they can bond. Now, typically on a dairy farm, you're separating them immediately after birth because you don't want them to bond, right? That reduces the stress of the separation. On our farm, it's pivotal to the system that they do bond, right? So we do that by keeping them together. And I'm sure there'd be a question about, do you get cows that are not very motherly, that don't really bond with their calf? And of course, a first calf heifer, a Holstein first calf heifer, lots of them are not very maternal. They don't know what this thing is. They don't care about it. But in my experience, it doesn't matter what cow, how she feels about her calf. If I put her in a pen with that calf for 3 days, she comes out all googly-eyed over it. So the suckling period, this is where the magic happens. I mean, this is my favorite part because I don't do anything. Basically, we just kick the cow and the calf out with the herd, and yeah, the cow is treated like any other cow. You know, it's put through the milking parlor twice a day. The calf is just kind of there. It does its own thing. It sucks on mom when it wants to, you know. There's really not too much to say about this, even though this is the heart of the system. But yeah, you can see from the photos here, the top right there, you know, the calves, they're with the cows in all instances, you know, in rain or shine. You know, this is them crossing the road. We do extensive pasturing, so you know, they cross the road with the cows, and then we have a creep area in the barn. Now, we're a compost pack barn, so you know, the animals are laying everywhere, but we still have a creep area, which is basically just sort of a raised gate that calves can walk under and cows can't get in there. And calves are actually quite motivated to access that area. They're like you and I. They like hanging out with people their age, and you know, they like to get away from their mom. And so we take full advantage of that by providing grain in there. It's very important that we expose these calves to grain, because we're still weaning them at the same time as, you know, a regular dairy farm would wean them, which is quite early for a calf, like compared to, say, the beef industry. So we need to be able to transition them onto grain to keep them growing. And because they're drinking so much milk, they're not highly motivated to eat grain. So it's very important that we kind of expose them to grain through sort of psychology, like in the same way, like if, yeah, I don't eat a lot of celery, but if there's celery sitting in a bowl on the kitchen table and I'm walking by it several times a day, I'll probably pop it in my mouth a few times. And it's kind of the same thing with the calf. Like we're just getting them to nibble and exposing them to grain. And so that leads us into weaning, which is usually around 8 weeks on our farm. You know, if we are in a surplus milk position, you know, we're filling our quota and then some, we'll probably keep the calf on a little bit longer. You know, I'm still experimenting to see, you know, what age works best for us with weaning. But we use quiet wean nose flaps for 2-stage weaning, which is, you know, same as what many beef farmers would do. I modify my quiet wean nose flaps. So you'll see the sort of zip tie whiskers on the side there. That's because minimizing cheating, which is, you know, a calf turning its head sideways and sucking out of the side of its mouth. Because the flap, you know, it prevents the calf from sucking on its mother, but it can still eat solid feed. But if the calf turns its head and sucks out of the side of its mouth, it just defeats the purpose. So we use the whiskers. Surprisingly, they work. I don't know why they work, but it's minimized cheating to a great degree for us. I've tried many different designs, and this is what we've settled on for now. So weaning is abrupt. Obviously, it's not ideal. You know, the calf is drinking as much milk as it wants one day. The next day, it is not getting any milk at all if we've been successful. So, you know, it's not ideal. You know, I think there's room for improvement here. But as long as we've exposed that calf to grain, you know, prior to weaning, it will remember the taste of the grain. It'll remember where it is, and it quickly adjusts, realizing that that is now its source of energy. So if the calf has not been exposed to grain, you know, the weaning is not only very stressful for the calf, but it's also going to set the calf back. It's going to not be growing very well during that time. So it's important that they're exposed to grain, and they'll adjust quite rapidly. And you know, technology could play a part here in reducing the stress of both weaning and separation. I would love to see like a retractable nose flap that I control with my app. Just set like, okay, the calf can drink from 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. or, you know, just gradually reduce the time, and that would be amazing. So separation is what comes next. And as I've said, you know, the calf can't be sucking. You know, if it's cheating, if it's still able to suckle on its mom, it's going to be as chaotic and stressful as you would imagine, right? This is why the dairy industry separates at birth, or one of the major reasons, is to reduce the stress on the animal. And so, if the calf is still suckling, then the bond between the calf and the cow is still very strong. If we've successfully weaned the calf, that bond has been broken quite a bit, and the separation can be quite smooth. You would be very surprised. We have, I would say, somewhere between 60 to 80% of our cow-calf pairs are weaned and separated with no visible balling, no visible stress, which to me is amazing. There's a lot of improvement to be made, and I think there's work that we can do in that regard, but I think it's good. We separate abruptly on our farm as well. We tried a gradual weaning process, and I think that would work well if you designed a barn for it. We're just kind of working with the barn that we have, and it's just too labor intensive, so we do abrupt separation at the moment. And I do believe that if the dairy industry sort of moves forward and does more research and refines this method, like, we can achieve not only 90% low stress separation, but I think we could get close to 100%. So that's how we do it. Let's get into why we do it, because that's the real interesting thing. Basically, for me, the top 3 reasons are the big motivators. It's because it just improves the quality of my life as a farmer. So we'll get into it. We will touch on welfare and consumer protective, but they're not big motivating factors for myself, although they are nice benefits. So labor, this is my favorite. I mean, this is the magic. I'm a very lazy farmer, and so when you just let the cow take care of the calf, it's just wonderful. I mean, I always wondered, like, why are we milking the cow and then taking that milk and putting it in a bottle, and then I have to stand there with the bottle feeding the calf? So I've eliminated this quite substantially. It takes us less than 2 man-hours to raise a calf to weaning, which is quite low. The industry average for a robotic feeding, like group housed robotic feeding, is about 7 hours average. It's 12 hours for, like, if you're raising them in hutches on bottles or buckets. Now that's average, but so very low. And if I was a big operation, that would just be a number on a spreadsheet. But as an owner operator, we have to do the calf rearing ourselves. So it's not just a number on a spreadsheet. It's me eliminating the most frustrating, unenjoyable job on the farm, right? I hate raising calves, which maybe is not a good sign if I'm going to become a father one day, but so health. Before I touch on our own experience, I just want to touch on what the research kind of suggests in this, because it's a very prevalent idea in the dairy industry that we separate cows and calves for their own good, for the health of the calf and for the health of the cow. And the research doesn't really support that very much. And so this picture is of the Dairy Cattle Code of Practice that they recently updated. They had a scientific committee that sort of looks at issues and kind of issues what they think the science says on something. And they say that there's really no good evidence that there's increased risk of disease for either the calf or the cow. This is a much better graphic, which I'm using this from permission from Dr. Nina. But basically what this chart is saying is the amount of studies, the amount of research studies that have found positive effects from keeping cows and calves together, the amount that have found negative effects from keeping cows together, and the amount that have found mixed results. So you can see that there are studies that found negative effects for various things, but if you sort of look at where the weight of the numbers are, it does lean decisively to one direction. So now to the anecdotes, which are the most important. It lines up with that perfectly for us. I mean, our calves are just healthier than ever. They're very growthy. They're slick. They're shiny. I can't say enough about it. I mean, You know, I can't rhapsodize enough about how wonderful our calves are. I'm always very proud looking at our calves because they grow really well, and we don't really have to deal with many instances of sickness. Now, I will say, you know, it's not a silver bullet. It's not a panacea. I have on the farm right now a group of calves, 3 or 4 calves that I'm not particularly proud of. They look quite unthrifty, and it's a bit of a mystery why. We're kind of working through that issue. But this is sort of the first time in 3.5 years that we've had calves like this. So, you know, it's not a panacea. The farmer still has to do a good job of managing and taking care of his calves, paying attention. But we've had much better success than we did when we raised calves in the hutches. And these calves, they're more socially adaptable. I don't know how to describe it. They're more confident. You know, it's difficult to describe, but through the animal's life, when we're moving them from pen to pen, or putting them out to pasture, or training them to the parlor, they're more confident. They learn quicker. They're easier to work with, which is interesting because you would almost expect these animals to be kind of wild because they're not pets that you've been bottle feeding for 2 months, you know. But they're surprisingly very easy to work with because they just feel more intelligent. I don't know. And of course, they're learning from their mom through these 2 months. They're learning to eat what mom's eating, you know, and so there's an epigenetic advantage to that, I think. And especially for our farm, where we're very intensive with pasturing, and pasturing is a skill that the cow actually has to acquire. And so, you know, we're very excited to see calves at a young age learning to graze, just like their mothers. So profit, money, money, money. You know, this is the one that I like to talk about. I'm not going to go too deeply into it because we don't have too many farmers here, but and I won't go into the math that I've done too much behind this, but you know, we'll go over some figures. So I want to compare it. I want to steelman my opponent, and I want to compare apples to apples. So the only real thing that we can compare this to is a free choice acidified milk program or a robotic feeding program, where the calf still has access to as much milk as it wants to drink. And so these numbers are kind of a bit based on a 2017 University of Wisconsin study. I've checked them against my neighbor who does acidified milk, so they're fairly accurate. If anything, I think they're quite conservative. So it would be about $440 to raise a dairy calf to 55 days. And again, that's $20 an hour. If you can get someone to take really good care of your calves for $20 an hour, you're doing pretty good, I can tell you. Now, if I raised it on the dam, in Canada, we have the quota system, so it very much matters whether I'm meeting my quota or not. If I'm not filling my quota, then there's an opportunity cost to every liter of milk that the calf drinks, to every liter that I don't harvest, and that's quite expensive. So you're going to look at almost doubling the cost of raising the calf to weaning if you're not filling your quota. So that's why we fill our quota. And if we do that, again, we can go over this math in question time if you guys want. But basically, I figure on our farm, it's about $400 to weaning in the winter months. It would be a bit cheaper in the summer because on pasture, our feed cost is a bit lower. But yeah, so in this case, you know, that's a 9% reduction in costs, which is not a lot, but you know, you're doing a lot of calves. You know, it's certainly a nice little improvement if my math is correct. But you know, it's not the only way that we could maybe make some money. So there's a few other ways. Lower infrastructure costs. On our farm, you know, we went from hutches to, we didn't have to put in any infrastructure. The calves are all raised on the cow now. But, you know, if we had to put in a new sterilized calf rearing facility with proper ventilation and robotic feeders, I mean, we'd be looking at a big infrastructure cost for raising calves. We're raising better calves. Maybe, a free choice robotic feeding program is raising similarly healthy, good calves. But coming from the hutches, certainly, our calves are much better. Can we breed them earlier? Are we going to have a better milk cow? Are we going to lower our veterinary costs, which is not in your best interest, but it's in my best? Do we have a lower mortality cost? Is there any monetary benefit to these confident, well-socialized calves? And this is highly speculative, but we know that if a cow is milked more often in the first months of lactation, she'll hit a higher peak milk. So is the combination of me milking the cow twice a day combined with the calf milking the cow, 6-7 times a day, is that going to increase my peak milk? Because if we increase peak milk, then the amount of milk that I'll get from that cow through the whole rest of the lactation will be improved. So very speculative. Again, this is where I wish I had better data. You wish I had better data. But I think, it's an area that needs to be researched because it's plausible. Yeah. So this is one of my favorite quotes. This is really the philosophy that I hold behind this. We still believe that the calf will return 100-fold the milk she received as a calf, or will withhold in proportion that part of her birthright of which she has been robbed, through the reduction in health and vitality resulting from it. So I think I have good reason to believe that we can raise the calf for less expense. But even if I don't, even if I have to raise it for more expense, if I'm raising a better calf, I think this is a good investment. I think that putting money into the calf to have a dairy cow that I'm going to be milking for a few years, I think it's a good investment. Animal welfare. I'm going to try and be brief, but I want to do justice to the nuances of this topic. It's not obvious whether this is better welfare. It matters what our view of good animal welfare is. Traditionally, the dairy industry has taken the view, that can be summarized as good animal welfare is minimizing suffering, unnecessary stress, pain, illness. That's good animal welfare. So they are laser focused on reducing stress. And if that is the view of animal welfare that we take, then this is not better animal welfare. It's worse animal welfare. Because undeniably, even if we perfect our weaning and our separation, the cow and the calf are going to have a more stressful period over those 2 months. Even just like through those 2 months, there'll be more stress. Same as, a mom who has a child, it's a bit stressful sometimes. It can cause some suffering. So if we just look at suffering, then this is worse animal welfare. The view that the consumer normally has, and which some industry professionals share, is that we're not just focused on suffering. Of course, we want to minimize suffering, unnecessary suffering as much as possible, but we want to balance that with positive experiences in the animal's life, right? It could be summarized as pursuing a life worth living, which is very subjective and slippery, but I think you get the gist of it. So if we take that view, then I believe that this is better welfare. But it matters which view you take. I sympathize heavily with the former view, and I lean more towards the latter view. Consumer perception, I mean, there's nothing too much to say here. Of course, they really want it. But what is interesting, I think, is that, the industry talks a lot about having to tell our story and educate the consumer, and we are not going to educate the consumer to change their mind on this. Okay, and part of that is because they have a different view of animal welfare than much of the dairy industry has. And, Dr. Nina at the British Columbia University did a study. They had visitors come into their state-of-the-art high welfare animal or dairy facility. And they had grad students stationed all around the barn to, talk to the visitors and give them information, provide context, right? I mean, this is like the gold mine of consumer education. And when people walked into the barn, they surveyed them, and when they walked out, and people walked out with a lesser opinion of the dairy industry. Okay? So I don't see that we're going to educate our way out of this. Some obstacles. The reasons that the dairy industry usually gives for separating cows and calves, I think, are often bad reasons. But there are good reasons, and some of these are good reasons. Infrastructure, the dairy industry has not really been thinking about cow-calf contact, so it can be difficult to work with the barns that we have, and barns are big investments. They're not easy to change, Does it work in a freestall barn? There are some farmers doing it. I don't know of any in North America. A lot of the farmers that are trying this have bedded packs. You have to have adequate pen space to keep fresh cows and calves together. You've got to have that bonding period. Is alley scrapers and robotic vacuum cleaners and these things, are these dangerous to the calf? I don't think that they should deter us from trying, but they should be on our mind. They should be concerns that we're thinking about. Now, on our own farm, my dad had a list of reasons how the calf was going to die when we tried this. And, most of those reasons didn't pan out. I mean, we've not seen that. So, yeah. Pasture, not many farmers pasture, but there are some frustrations. Calves, they like to wander off and sit down in the tall grass and wait for their mom to come get them. But if they've wandered under the fence, mom's not going to come get them. And it's very annoying, very annoying. Lost milk revenue. Obviously, the calf is drinking more milk. There can be letdown issues at milking too. Some cows, more so than others, will just not want to give you their milk if they have a calf suckling on them. Now, I think that's something that we have to selectively breed for over generations, but that's a concern. Obviously, weaning and separation distress. We have to try and minimize that, but it's still going to be probably greater than if we separate them at birth. And disease detection, you have to pay a bit more attention because you're not there feeding the calf 2-3 times a day. You're not seeing it as often, maybe. So you've got to be on the ball in detecting. So in conclusion, I think it's still very early on with cow-calf contact. The dairy industry is only really starting to kind of pay real attention to this. But I think there's lots of potential. If we consider the fact that in the last 100 years, the dairy industry has been laser focused on raising calves and cows separately. There's been countless man hours and resources and research that has gone into how do we raise calves well in the context of separation. And if we devote that same amount of energy to this system, I'm very confident that the system would have better outcomes. And certainly, as a farmer who's lazy, I think it has great outcomes already. So here's some further resources. Feel free to take a picture if you want. I think if you guys are interested, you should join our Facebook group. It's Dairy Cow Calf Contact Network. It's private, but I pretty much approve all requests to join. And yeah, there's some good resources to get you started there if you want to dive deeper. Yeah. So, yeah, that's it.